Well, hi again. Thanks for joining me for the newsletter. Today is March 4th, 2019, and it is the 8th week of the legislative session. So I wanted to give you just a little rundown of what's going to be happening this week in the Senate. So on Wednesday this week, the state economist is going to be speaking at the Senate Finance table, talking about the impact of the budget. So there'll be the state economist and also the chief of research and analysis. And then on Thursday, there'll be another economic overview, this time by Mushin Gatabi. He's the economist for the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of Alaska. So what the Senate Finance Committee meeting is looking at now is how is this budget going to impact the people of the state? How's it going to impact businesses? So that's the question that will be answered. This week also, crime is still the headline subject. The Senate Judiciary Committee is going to be hearing crime bills all week, as will the State Affairs Committee. So that's all good news, moving those bills ahead. Then it looks like there's going to be a presentation on the Alaska Marine Highway and the possible reductions in that budget in the finance subcommittees that will be meeting this week. Those finance subcommittees, actually you can watch those on your computer. They're not televised like the rest of our committee meetings on the television, but you can watch them on your computer. And they occur in the evenings commonly, sometimes in the afternoons, late afternoons here in the building. So that's what's going on in committees coming forward. On Saturday, that was 2 days ago, I was in Anchorage for the Anchorage Caucus. And I was one of the legislators there at the table. And so we heard a lot of information from citizens. And I actually wanted to talk to you about the key subjects that were discussed. And let me turn to that page because I kept notes. The most commonly brought up subject was education. There were probably half the audience was teachers of some kind or affiliated with K-12 education as well as the university. So that was their main issue with the cuts to education. Other topics that came up was the University of Alaska, folks saying, you know, my son or daughter got free tuition to the university, please maintain that. We heard a lot about the physician education program known as WWAMI. That is a program where we partner with Washington State and also Montana, Idaho, and I think, Washington and perhaps Wyoming is the other W in WWAMI. It's WWAMI, and I believe those are the 5 states. But in any case, we collaborate and work through the University of Washington to educate physicians in those partnering states. And that is something that is being considered for reductions in our budget, and folks were there advocating for that. Medicaid was another big subject, folks wanting to maintain funding for Medicaid. And there were just a couple folks that said, you know, if necessary, we need to look at reducing the dividend and use those funds to maintain state services. So what I wanted to talk to you about was a couple of the suggestions that I heard from people. Now, after the large meeting, we went to breakout sessions. So that's smaller meetings with just people in our districts. So for me, that's District 27 and 28. District 27 is the Muldoon area, kind of where Muldoon Road makes the big curve and turns into Tudor. So it's that area all the way up to DeBar Road where the Fred Meyer is. That's District 27, and also include in that Stuckagin Heights. Then District 28 is the other half of my district, and that goes from the Hilltop Ski Area all the way down to Girdwood. So those are my 2 districts that make up the Senate district. And so we met with some of those from folks that were there from those 2 districts. So one of the questions that I always pose to folks, just as I pose to you who get the newsletter, what solutions do you suggest? And I want to take a moment just to say thank you for all the emails I've been getting. please keep sending me your suggestions. I appreciate hearing from you. So at the meeting on Saturday, there were two main suggestions that I heard. The first one was that we needed to tax oil companies more and to stop giving them money, tax credits. So I wanted to just kind of address that. Someone else said that we should increase the royalties that the oil companies have to pay to pump our oil. First, on the royalties. The royalty payment is negotiated in the contracts with the oil companies. So it's not something that we can simply arbitrarily raise or lower. Just so you know that, that's set in a contract. It's typically 12.5 to, in some cases, slightly higher than that for the royalty. In terms of the tax credits, one of the things I wanted you to know is that we got rid of the tax credits a couple years ago. Those tax credits were going to small companies that we had hoped to invite to the state to diversify the companies that were on the North Slope. In the past, we've just had those big companies up there, Conoco, BP, and Exxon. And so we were sort of feeling like we were being held prisoner by those big companies. So we offered tax incentives for smaller companies to come to Alaska, which they did. Oil Search is one of those. Armstrong Oil is another one. Hillcore is one. Kalis Energy. So these are some of the smaller companies that have come, and to our delight, they have found new deposits of oil. That's exactly why we invited them here, because they have some innovative ideas. They tried some things that were outside the box, and they found more oil. That oil is our future and is now under development, defining how much oil is there. That's really positive. So those tax credits, however, were discontinued a couple years ago. I worked with Representative Garantar on that, and we eliminated those tax credits. I wanted you to know that because there's some messaging out there that is telling people that the state of Alaska is giving away all this money to oil companies, and it simply isn't true. I wanted you to know that. There is still debt that we have for those tax credits. In other words, we said we would give them these credits, and we didn't keep up our part of the bargain. So that is an issue we need to pay off. It's about $800 million. We're paying it off in very small increments right now. So we no longer offer those cashable credits. Right now, the oil industry, the taxes that they pay, funds about 80% of the state's budget. That's a huge chunk. We absolutely do not want to lose that chunk of revenue. And with the new oil that's been found, that amount of revenue will go up in the coming years. So that's kind of the answer to that question, well, can't we raise taxes on oil companies? Well, we could, but we would likely lose in the end because we wouldn't have the oil development that we have now. The second thing that was brought up was an income tax. So I want to talk to you for a bit about an income tax. So I wanted to actually put it up here in writing for you in terms of the income tax. We looked at the idea of an income tax about 2 or 3 years ago. It was proposed by Governor Walker. So I actually pulled up that data again, and I've summarized it here on the board. So we did have an income tax here. I, as a young person, used to pay it. It ranged anywhere from 3 to 14.5% of our federal income tax. It was based on our federal income tax. In 2016, Governor Walker proposed, and by the way, this income tax, we eliminated it in 1980. We had so much revenue coming in from oil, from the oil leases and the prospectivity of oil, that we eliminated the income tax. So in 2016, Governor Walker proposed an income tax that would be 6% of whatever we paid the federal government. So what we found when we dug into this is that 45% of Alaskans would actually have no tax liability at this amount of tax with all the deductions that would apply. In addition, we found that it would take about 2 years to set up an Alaska IRS, and it would require anywhere from 60 to 90 new state employees, depending on the complexity of the tax we proposed. Just the startup costs were $6 million. So if we had, let's say we adopted this today, this is 2019, we wouldn't see a tax structure set up, an Alaskan IRS set up, until the year 2021. Then, once implemented, it would bring in approximately $200 million a year at this tax proposal. Remember that the deficit this year is $1.6 billion. That $1.6 billion shortfall assumes a $3,000 permanent fund dividend check to every man, woman, and child, and assumes some pretty significant reductions in state government. So what the Senate Finance team, what the Senate majority is trying to do right now is to dig into this budget and find places where we can incorporate efficiencies, but we're being very careful. We don't want to decimate the economy of Alaska, which would happen if we made a full $1.6 billion cut in a single year. So the bottom line is, I wanted you to know those were 2 suggestions that were made at the Anchorage Caucus this last weekend: raise taxes on oil companies and institute an income tax. Both of those have certainly possibilities, but definitely some downsides, and wouldn't make a significant difference in our budget deficit at this point. Thanks so much for watching. Please continue to send in your thoughts about the budget. I appreciate hearing from you. Also notice in the newsletter that Representative Lance Pruitt and I will be having a smaller local town hall meeting on March 23rd. You'll see more information about that in the newsletter. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.